Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is home ownership consultant Ross Kay from thewealthyhomeowner.ca. Welcome back to the show, Ross.
Thanks for having me back, Jim.
Ross, we're talking about British Columbia this week, and Carol, a landlord in Burnaby, asks, I'm wondering if now is the time to sell my investment real estate. I hear supply is short, and I'm wondering if that means I should short the housing market by selling now.
Well, Carol, I suspect your narrative that you're being influenced by is the one from the British Columbia, your local realtors out in British Columbia, because this is a narrative now that pretty much is dominated North American. Every single city in North America, the local realtors have the same talking point. So a couple of comments that I would have to say to you right now. Yes, it's true right now. Home buyers are being manipulated by the Canadian organized real estate in Canada. It's really reaching its peak right about now. And when you hear later this week the Canadian real estate releasing their stats, their narrative is going to be very, very specific, Carol. So what you're going to hear is that home sales have declined somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 to 18%. And they're at the opposite side of the equation, you're going to hear prices are up somewhere around 14%. They're going to come in at around 687,000 is what they're going to call the price for September. They're not going to tell anybody, Carol, the price has been falling across Canada now since March. But, in other words, home buyers are spending less with each passing month than they were March of this year. Look, they're not going to tell you anything, Carol, about how the housing market is. Like, let me use this as an example for you. You're not going to hear that in Vancouver, I think there was about 25 extra townhome or condos that were sold, apartment condos that were sold by members of the Greater Vancouver Real Estate Board this September versus last September. So the number of sales of single detached homes decreased, but condos actually increased. So what they didn't tell you is how they got the rise in average price for condominium apartments. And that was because all of the additional sales that took place were in West Vancouver, which has the highest average selling price of a condominium apartment. So when you start counting, for every 1,000 homes that you include in your average sale price, if all of a sudden an extra 22 of those homes go to the wealthiest neighborhood in your community, of course the average price is going to go up. I mean, we're seeing that's happening right now across Canada. Vancouver's share of the national number of sales has been remaining the same between last September and this September, except that the total number of sales has decreased Canada-wide. The total number of sales in British Columbia has decreased in British Columbia, yet the share of sales in Vancouver held the same. The number of sales that are happening in Calgary, for every 1,000 home sales included in the average for Korea, more of those sales this month will take place in Calgary. So that technically should be a lowering of the price. But if there's not enough of an increase in sales in Calgary per thousand to offset the shift I just told you about a local real estate market in Vancouver, where condominium apartments in the most expensive part of the city accelerated in the month of September, the public has no idea what's going on. You're asking about the supply issue. And you're asking about, I keep hearing these comments about supply versus demand. There's not enough supply to keep up demand, and that's the reason that sales are falling. Well, it's hogwash. What it is people are not brave enough to put their home in the market because they can smell something's wrong with the market. They know in their heart something's wrong. So they're afraid of putting their home in the market because they don't want to move up the property ladder now because they're going to wait till the prices are better before they make that jump. Flip side, sales are declining because clearly first-time buyers did not enter the market in enough numbers to maintain the pace of sales that was ongoing, which is why you get a higher average price in Canada for September. In the same month, the number of sales is declining by 18%. So that's what you have to understand when you read these terms about supply, and that's including where you're talking about in Burnaby. But let me go on further, because you say you're an investor, and this is an investment property. So each investor is different, but I will give you how we view it. You should never, ever plan on selling investment real estate. Whatever terms that you started out on owning the property at on day one should be a plan that you will continue on till the day you are no longer here on earth. There is never a need to even attempt to short a housing market when you're a real estate investor. As long as you framed your purchase on the very first day that the first tenant moved in, you never have to sell, or you should never plan on selling. In the same way that you should never gouge your tenants for a rent increase as an opportunist in a housing market where there's been a pandemic. It is unethical. There is no need for an ethical real estate investor to act that way. An ethical real estate investor simply needs to let their rents increase whatever the rent controls are in your province. If your province doesn't have rent controls, then you need to have whatever the housing inflation is in your market. Now, housing inflation is not the same as house price illusion from your local MLS board. If your housing stock is improving, that means you need to maintain your property's place in the housing stock so you don't lose money. So if that is 2%, for the sake of the argument, and then inflation is at 1% for the sake of the argument, then you need to increase your rent by 3% if there's not already rent controls in place. There is no need for you to ask your tenants to pay more money, because your concept when you started out as a real estate investor should have been how you were going to begin to extract cash from that real estate investment long term. And as long as you framed your investment decision properly on day one, there is no housing stock, housing market, financial reason for you to alter that plan. Your plan will work. You don't have to worry about it. So when I hear a real estate investor say, so should I short the market? Well, for your local people in your neighborhood, the families who want to buy the house, go ahead, short it, because that means your property is going to come to market. As an investor, you can afford to take a little bit more of a loss sooner in a housing downturn than a regular homeowner can. So you're going to be willing to take that loss, because each month your property is vacant and there's not a tenant in there, you're losing money. So if a buyer will give you a quick closing and you're losing $3,000 a month as the property sitting there vacant, if they give you a quick closing, or for the sake of the argument, they close on it in 3 months, that's going to cost you $9,000. Whereas if you hold out for someone else, where it's double that, 6 months, you're going to lose $18,000. You might as well give the first couple of $5,000 discount purchasing your property to get that quicker closing date, because it's going to put an extra $4,000 in your pocket. So what's going on right now, what's going to go on for the rest of this week, Carol, is the Canadian home buyer, at the worst time for this to happen, is going to be manipulated by the stats that are produced. You're being manipulated right now, Carol. There is not now a supply demand in the resale housing market. There is a shortage of supply being built. That is 100% true. There is a shortage of backyards in this country. We have adequate number of balconies. We don't have enough backyard. When you add backyards, that creates at least one vacant balcony, by the way. These supply and demand comments that are coming from your local real estate board is that your local real estate agents trying to figure out why sales are slowing, because they don't have the understanding of a housing market, or they haven't worked a long enough period of time to gain the knowledge. Where all this simply is the home current homeowners are too afraid of a correcting housing market to put their house on the market. That is why you're not seeing new listings count increase. But I'll also tell you the expiry rate is not increased. So your active supply is staying almost the same. It's not really changing. It's almost a 1-for-1. It has been almost a 1-for-1 now for 5 months. And that's the first sign always of a correcting housing market. Again, you're not going to hear that come in either. So if you're looking to short the housing market because your real estate investment plan was not correct on day one, then sure, you should go ahead and be looking at that. It depends on the type of home that you own, what category of home you own, the condition of the house, where it's located, and what is happening right now in the property ladder in that neighborhood. If you don't have those answers to all those questions, then you really shouldn't be trying to short the market any more than a buyer should be trying to get into the market if they don't have the answer to all those questions. Ask that to your local real estate agent. They're going to sit there with a stupid look in their face wondering, what the heck are you talking about? You don't need to know that. All you need to do is look at the Canadian Real Estate Association or the British Columbia Real Estate Association or the Greater Vancouver Real Estate Association. All associations who will tell you house prices are rising as sales are declining, and they're going to make up some story to say that this is not going to fear of things not ending well is a false fear. The fear is true. If you're going to get out of the market, Carol, you should be looking at that seriously and getting the answers to all those questions I mentioned.
We'll have more with Ross Kay right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Ross Kay. Ross, our political leaders over the last 2 years have made massive financial changes to Canada. Joe in Vancouver asks, I'm hearing all kinds of reasons why our housing bubble could be popped. Can Ross comment on what impact inflation can play on house prices going forward?
Well, inflation yes, it impacts every housing market, but I'm going to say effective inflation, okay? The same as there is effective deflation. So when interest rates are falling, that is effective deflation in your carrying costs of a home. It kind of works the opposite. Deflation, effective deflation, means that house prices, people can buy more expensive houses, which your local real estate board then in turn says, oh, house prices are rising. Instead of buying a $100,000 house, you buy a $110,000 house because the monthly carrying charges are exactly the same. Your local real estate board says, oh, prices are up 10%. Everybody believes them and it moves on. Housing bubble builds and the risks to the economy have. Now, inflation it works the opposite way. So as you get rising inflation, okay, that's negative pressure on house prices. Prices are going to go down. But it's not inflation as it's normally communicated to people. Let's look at gas prices, okay? So natural gas has skyrocketed over the last couple of months. So if you didn't take out a guaranteed contract on your natural gas, you're going to pay more for your natural gas as the year goes on. Your gasoline for a car. If you have moved out to an outer city in order to drive till you can get a single detached home, your commuting costs are going to go up because now your price for gasoline is skyrocketing. Your food sources, all your foods are all up substantially. I mean, one of the key components that you should always track is the price of bacon. Whether you eat bacon or not really doesn't matter. You should always track the price of bacon, because it's a telltale of the inflation that homeowners are going to experience. Because as your food costs rise, you have less money available to spend on your house. So contrary to popular belief that home buyers are irrational and stupid and will do anything to own a home, I can tell you home buyers are always rational people who look at their budget, and while they may stretch themselves in order to get a home for the first couple of years of ownership, they're very, very prudent in the decision that they make because they don't want to lose their down payment. They don't want the house to be foreclosed on. So they're well set up when they first start out in these purchase decisions. So my reference for inflation goes back to the 1980s, where Ontario's housing market was just booming, even surpassing what you read in the newspapers today, as we came out of COVID. The Ontario housing market was booming better, far greater in the late 80s than it was even today. So the Bank of Canada had been dropping rates, and then all of a sudden they had to start raising rates. And they believed, wrongly so, that they could raise them without negatively impacting the economy. Well, they raised them, and as anybody who studies housing markets understands, if you raise them enough, or you raise them enough quickly, or you raise them enough slowly, the housing market is going to respond exactly as it should. If you raise them quickly, the housing market will slow down quicker. If you raise them slowly, the housing market will slow down slower. So inflation, the way that we measure it, basically has something to do with the cost of living, but our cost of living includes everything that's associated with putting a roof over your head and keeping your family fed. The taxation rate that you have to pay. Are our taxes going to have to go up? Well, we know carbon tax, because carbon tax impacts everything that you buy, the price of the goods that you're buying is going to go up. We know there are legitimate supply chain shortages right now. So we know that, like, aluminum cans are in short supply in Ontario right now. I don't know if they're in short supply in British Columbia right now or not. Our contacts are not in British Columbia. We focus with the aluminum here in Ontario because it leads the rest of the country, just for the sake of the argument. So we already know that there's a shortage of supply there. That's going to drive prices up. Again, if you listen to the last section when we talked about the fake supply and demand reports from your local real estate board, these are real supply and demand shortages. Everybody knows it. You've read the articles about the price of used cars skyrocketing. You can't get a new car. At the same time, what are we even talking about cars for if the government is going to bring in legislation that means that $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 car that you're buying today that runs on gas is basically going to be legislated off the road in 5 years? Makes no logical sense. So that also tells you they're not going to be able to legislate these things off the road in 5 years without putting Canadian families in the financial doghouse. So inflation, yes, can be a bigger trigger to house price declines. But again, as I've said, in this case, how home buyers in every province in this country have been spending less money for the last 4 to 5 months, depending on which province that you're in. So that trend is already there. That has been happening. Mark my words here, okay? That has been happening, Joe, at the same time that mortgage rates fell to a record low. Let's not forget that. A substantial portion of house price illusion from April 2020 through till today is solely caused by lower mortgage rates, because those lower mortgage rates allow people to buy a more expensive home. That more expensive home gets reported as being higher average prices, which is house price illusion. You can't take anything away from that. So when you understand that prices have already been falling home buyers are spending less for the last 4 to 5 months, even while mortgage interest rates reached an all-time low, you have to understand there's some other factor in play, because prices would be substantially higher than what they are. That other factor that's in play is real inflation. And as I said in the previous section, Canadian families are smart. Canadian families are extremely rational. Canadian families are extremely prudent, as evidenced by the last 50 years of foreclosure data in this country. I don't care how anybody wants to insult the regular Canadian family. Regular Canadian families are prudent, rational people. They know inflation's going on because they're buying goods and services every single day that their family needs to survive. That, in turn, has restrained some of the house price illusion that you would have normally seen had these interest rates decline happened over a 2-year period without COVID locking the market and then allowing it to reopen in the first place.
For people curious about the aluminum can shortage, it's all pandemic related, of course, because people weren't going to pubs and drinking draft beer that are in large aluminum containers. They switched to buying liquor from their local supply, which sells in small cans, and all those cans were snapped up, leading to a shortage of aluminum cans. It also didn't help that the U.S. slapped tariffs on Canadian aluminum, because that meant they made fewer cans to start with because they couldn't afford the more expensive supplies.
You would think this would be headline news, wouldn't you, Jim? You would think that someone would be out there, the Bank of Canada, StatsCan, all these bank economists, you would think somebody would be out there speaking up for the regular Canadian family and explaining how inflation can absolutely destroy a family, and it can also destroy an economy.
Politicians' pay is automatically updated to the rate of inflation. They don't care.
Well, there's another irony, Jim. I mean, you just hit on one of my pet peeves, okay? So for housing analysts, as a housing analyst like myself, we track wages, okay? That's always a core component of how we're monitoring the market. Why has StatsCan never separated public and private wages from the average weekly wages? How is it possible that that data point has never been released in Canada anywhere? Like, that the public sector workers have built-in inflators in their contracts, while the private sector worker doesn't. The public sector was paid during COVID, even if they didn't go to work. The private sector went on CERB, unemployment. How come that data point has never been released by StatsCan? What are they so afraid of? To me, Jim, just looks like organized real estate, except over at StatsCan. Everyone is afraid of telling the truth because it's going to prove they, as the emperor, is wearing no clothes.
Another question for you from Barry. We're wondering if the move to build up around transit or transit hubs in our big cities should be mandated by provincial governments that are overthrowing the current power of municipal councils. Will that help my kids finally enter the housing market?
Well, I'll tell you, Barry, it's one of the things that we just can't believe is going on. Let me put it to you in this context. These people who are suggesting that your provincial or federal government, for that matter, takes over a power that your municipally elected officials have been entrusted to deal with is ludicrous. As a Canadian, the most powerful vote you have is for your local mayor and your local council, because those people oversee the most important things in your life. They are going to impact the housing supply. They're going to impact the schools. They're going to impact the recreation facilities, the parks, the streets, the roads, everything. And the only people who get to decide what goes on in your local town or your big city are the people who live there, because they're the only people who have a vote in that town or city. Now we have people saying, oh, let's take the power away from the regular Canadian family through the right to vote, and let's give it to a provincial party or a federal party. This is a little bit like saying, let's let Vancouver determine what happens in Kamloops. Let's let voters vote in what the taxes are going to be in Kamloops. Well, guess what, folks? Because that comes next. The Kamloops voter is going to say, hey, we want Vancouver families to pay the same municipal taxes that we pay in Kamloops. We're hearing this in Ontario, where they're saying that, the Ford government should step in and they should force the municipalities to build transit over these transit hubs. I'll get to that specific talking point in a second, because my continuation, okay, if that's what you believe, then I also want homeowner, $1 million homeowners in Toronto to pay the exact same amount of municipal tax as a $1 million homeowner in Windsor. If you have $1 million worth of wealth in a home in Toronto, I want you to pay the same municipal taxes on that wealth that you have to pay in Windsor. Whoa, that's what you're going to hear. Whoa, we don't want that. That means we'd have to pay 3 times what we're paying in Toronto. That's right. You want to tax the wealth of a family in Windsor 3 times more than you're taxing yourself, and then you want to come with your handout saying that you want help from the government on housing. It's ludicrous. Same thing in British Columbia. Vancouver, with their hand out, wanting every other city in the province, every homeowner or tenant in every other city in the province to chip in more money, higher local taxes that in turn have to get sent to Vancouver is ludicrous. It's ludicrous, especially when a lot of your housing stock is owned by non-Canadians. Transit hubs. Let's build up our cities over transit and transit hubs. It sounds like such a beautiful solution until you think about just 20 years ago, where you couldn't sell a house backing onto a railroad track, where the families that lived near the tracks were considered the lowest type of financial group in your community. And worse, they were stigmatized by these locations. Now all of a sudden, they want to say it's great to be living in your local, near a local transit hub where you get to hear the rail cars going by your house every single day, 24 hours a day. Oh, that is great for mental health, isn't it? So instead of these people saying, look, we're going to have to some compromise here. We're going to have a national strategy to build out the housing stock in a manner that improves the quality of life for all Canadians. That quality of life is going to have to be facilitated by lowering the cost of housing, lowering the cost of home ownership, lowering the price of a brand new house with a backyard. Not through tax credit, not through more first-time buyers credit, not through some crazy program reducing CMHC fees, but by simply adding more building lots. And probably it would be a great idea is that you insist a lot of those building lots go to small builders instead of the big major builders in this country. Because when you have a whole bunch of small builders competing for your business, not only does the quality of home being built go up, but the price you can afford to buy, or the price that you have to pay, goes down. This is how the housing market in Canada was like in the late 80s, the 1990s. Lots of small builders building enough supply to keep prices in check. None of it's all gone. Now the solution is this. Let's ask your provincially elected government, not your local government, to force densification on transit hubs in your city without the local voters voting to approve it. You'll notice what I said here. You couldn't sell a house that was backing onto the train track. We have it in my hometown here in Burlington. We have the most expensive subdivision in the city was called Millcroft. And it was being built as the great housing crash of 1989 took hold. There was one beautiful little cul-de-sac at the end of on the outside of the subdivision that sided onto a railroad track. They built 12-foot concrete walls to take away from the sound of the trains that ran down that railroad track. They couldn't sell them. So that meant the company that owned the land had to sell it to an out-of-town builder who built a lower-priced home, still a good quality home, but instead of clay brick, they used cement brick for the sake of the argument. Instead of top-of-the-line windows, they used a second-tier window. That's the only thing that they could build there because they had to build them cheap enough because nobody wanted to buy them. Now, they're making it sound like this is the solution. Well, I don't know if people have ever lived near a railroad track. Now, personally, as my own personal choice, I would have purchased one of those homes that I had described to you a minute ago because they had to give them bigger backyards. The backyards were 20 feet deeper than what the rest of the community subdivision got. I would prefer to have the train go by and for me to learn to accommodate it if I got a bigger backyard. That's my personal preference. I would have also been planning to move as my personal preference, move up the property ladder. But here we have these people suggesting, this is what they're suggesting. When you vote municipally, they want to take away your rights that you moved into that city. You made a conscious decision to move to a city to a certain degree because you had the municipal vote. You knew the bylaws. You knew the zoning. Before you made a decision, you reviewed all these things. In most provinces, you had to read, your local real estate agent had to give you a form that disclosed the zoning to you before you bought. In the contract, in the purchase contract, and your lawyers, they all approved the zoning. And if they didn't approve it, you never would have been allowed to buy the house. Your lawyer would have told you no. Your real estate agent would have told you no. Your parents would have told you no. The government itself would have told you no. Now they're suggesting all those rights get taken away. It's insanity from our perspective. There's nothing wrong with going into a community and saying, okay, folks, you have 15 years or 20 years, and the existing zoning in this subdivision will be changed. So if you're going to buy into this subdivision, you know that you have 15 years of the existing zoning. Then the zoning will be moved, will be upzoned. If there's 10 years remaining, okay, this community is already ready for upzoning. Okay, it was upzoned 15 years, but 5 years have passed, and now there's only 10 years left. So if you're buying a home in this neighborhood, understand you only have 10 years left before this neighborhood gets upzoned. Then 5 years, the same thing. With each passing year, the new family that's moving into the neighborhood is told the truth, and they get to make a rational decision. You don't con people for 25, 30 years, or even as late as yesterday, into buying a home in a neighborhood, only to find out 24 hours later or a year later that the terms that you purchased that home under have changed. The zoning that you thought was in place in perpetuity, because everyone had told you the zoning hasn't changed. It hasn't changed for the last 60 years. There's nothing on the records that they're planning on changing the zoning. Was a fraud. You were conned. They lied to you. These are the types of decisions that people who don't work in the housing market or who haven't studied families as they've navigated the property ladder have any understanding to draw a fact-based decision from. I've just told you that if you want to upzone neighborhoods, it's very simple to get YIMBYism and to remove NIMBYism. And you do that by stating long-term upzoning plans as legislated by your municipal council. We know that our city is going to need an extra 10,000 housing units in the next 15 years. Well, the only way that we believe we can accommodate it, the council says, is that is if we densify. Okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the demographics of our neighborhoods. We're going to find the neighborhoods that have the oldest home ownership demographic, and we're going to give them the 15 years notice, 20 years notice. And that means every family that buys into that neighborhood knows that it's 12, 18, 17, 15, 12, 11, 10, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. There's only 1 year of the current zoning left before upzoning. Well, guess what, folks? In the last 5 to 7 years, property values go up because the people who are buying them are now already planning for that upzoning. They know the land will be worth more money. They know their buyers, who are informed, rational buyers, making a rational decision on information that they can rely upon to make that decision. It's the most unethical thing that I have ever heard from my perspective, because I know how important zoning is in a home buying decision. For someone to suggest that a random stranger who has no understanding of what's going on in that local community demands that local community gets rezoned, and that all of the rights and all the rational decision making and all of the financial commitment that you made to your home is eradicated overnight, when there was no need for it to happen. There still is no need today. If you want to rezone areas, simply give the existing owners a reasonable amount of time to start to make changes to their life if they don't like what the rezoning is going to be. The flip side is, when you're going to start asking young families to live on top of a railroad track or these transit hubs where you're going to force them to live on concrete, you have to ask yourself, why are you doing that? When there are lots of other alternatives available to add backyards in every province in this country.
Ross, thank you so much for the update.
Thanks for having me on, Jim.
My guest has been home ownership consultant Ross Kay from the wealthyhomeowner.ca. If you have any questions for Ross, he'll gladly answer them. If you send the question to info@housestreet.com, find us on Twitter @HouseStreet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.